April 29th, 1945. The war in Europe was almost over. German cities were collapsing. Hitler was 2 days from death. Victory was no longer a question of if, only when. On the outskirts of Munich, a column of American infantry slowed to a halt beside a silent train. 39 freight cars. No movement, no guards, no sound. The men of the 45th Infantry Division had fought through Sicily, Anzio, and southern France. They had seen artillery tear bodies apart. They had buried friends in foreign soil. They had spent 2 years learning that war was something you could understand if you stayed close enough to it and kept your nerve. That morning, their orders were routine. Secure a complex near the town of Dachau, just northwest of Munich. Intelligence suggested a military installation, a depot, possibly a training facility. No one had briefed them about a concentration camp. No one had mentioned the train. It sat on a side track just outside the perimeter fence. Dark, closed, still. The first men approached cautiously, rifles ready. They expected resistance. What they encountered instead was silence, and a smell that did not belong to war. One of them climbed onto the coupling between 2 freight cars and slid the door open. For a moment, nobody moved. Then someone swore under his breath. And Felix Sparks, the lieutenant colonel commanding the battalion's lead elements, understood in that instant that the day was not going to go the way any of them had planned. Felix Sparks was 30 years old on the morning of April 29th, 1945. He had been born in poverty in rural Arizona, the son of a homesteader who scratched a living from land that didn't want to give one. He had worked his way through college, earned a law degree, and been commissioned as an army officer in 1941. By 1943, he was commanding a battalion of the 157th Infantry Regiment, the 45th Division, the Thunderbirds, a unit built largely from National Guardsmen from Oklahoma, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona. He had commanded these men through some of the worst fighting of the Mediterranean theater. At Anzio, his battalion had held a position on the Mussolini Canal for 4 months under continuous German fire. He had lost men he knew personally, men he had trained, men whose families he could name. He had written the letters. He had made the decisions that sent soldiers into positions where they died. He was not a man who lost control. That is the first thing you need to understand about what happened at Dachau. Felix Sparks was precisely the kind of officer the Army produced at its best. Experienced, decisive, and capable of maintaining discipline in conditions that destroyed it in lesser men. What happened on April 29th did not happen because the wrong man was in command. It happened because of what was in those freight cars. And no amount of experience or composure had prepared anyone for that. Inside the freight cars were bodies, packed tightly, layered, men in striped uniforms, women, children, some so emaciated their bones pressed sharply against their skin. Many had died days before, some only hours earlier. The train had originated at Buchenwald, more than 300 kilometers to the north. It had been loaded with prisoners being evacuated ahead of the Allied advance. The guards had abandoned it. The doors had remained sealed. Nearly 2,000 prisoners had been locked inside those cars, without food, without water, without ventilation. The living had lain among the dead as the days passed. The men of the 45th had seen death before, but death in battle has motion and noise, and a logic the military mind can process. Objectives, losses, tactical decisions. What was in those freight cars had none of that. It was organized decay, deliberate abandonment. One private sat down in the gravel beside the track and removed his helmet, and did not put it back on. Another turned away and was sick. Others simply stood and looked, not speaking, not moving. Sparks walked the length of the train, He looked into car after car. He did not look away. He later said that what he saw there, before he had even reached the camp gates, was the thing that stayed with him longest, not what happened inside. The train. Beyond the railway siding stood the outer fence of Dachau. Watchtowers, barbed wire, concrete walls. Inside were approximately 30,000 surviving inmates. Starved, diseased, barely standing. The camp's commandant had already fled. In his place was a 23-year-old SS officer named Heinrich Vicker, who stepped forward under a white flag and surrendered the camp in correct military form. He was clean. His uniform was pressed. His boots were polished. He said the words that soldiers say when defeat is inevitable. The American officers accepted the surrender and looked past Wicker, past the uniform, past the rehearsed composure, toward the open train cars behind them, toward the smell still present in the air, toward the crematorium buildings visible beyond the yard. Inside the fence, prisoners had begun pressing against the wire, calling out in broken English, in French, in Polish, in languages the soldiers couldn't identify. Some collapsed before they reached the fence. Others wept. Some simply stared at the American uniforms with an expression that had no military category. Sparks could feel the day straining against its structure. He had been a soldier long enough to recognize the sound of discipline about to break. What happened in the coal yard near the southern wall of Dachau on the afternoon of April the 29th, 1945, has been the subject of military investigations, historical scholarship, and veterans' testimony for 80 years. The facts are not fully agreed upon. What follows is the account that emerges most consistently from the available record. A group of SS guards, between 17 and 50 men, depending on the account, had been disarmed and placed against a wall in the coal storage area. They were surrendered prisoners. Under the laws of war, they were entitled to protection. A soldier set up a machine gun facing the line of guards. What happened next lasted approximately 10 seconds. When it stopped, a number of the SS men were dead or wounded. Sparks heard the machine gun fire from across the compound. He ran toward it. He found his men firing into a cluster of bodies and understood immediately what had happened and what it would mean. He drew his pistol and fired into the air. He shouted for them to stop. He shouted it more than once. The gun fell silent. He later said, in testimony, in interviews, in a memoir written decades afterward, that he felt no hesitation about stopping it. He also said he understood, without needing to analyze it, why it had happened. He had opened the same freight car doors those men had opened. He had seen what they had seen. The line between understanding and justifying was the line he spent the rest of the day, and in some ways the rest of his life, trying to hold. The army did not look away from what had happened at Dachau. Within days of the liberation, an investigative team arrived to examine the events of April 29th. Photographs taken that day documented the bodies in the coal yard. Statements were collected. The findings were specific and uncomfortable. Surrendered prisoners had been shot after they had been disarmed. Under military law, that was a war crime. Recommendations for court-martial were drafted. The report moved up the chain of command until it reached General George S. Patton. Patton had also toured Dachau. He had walked through the camp. He had seen the crematorium. He had read the investigator's summary of what the 45th Division had found in those freight cars. In correspondence from this period, Patton described the SS as, and I'm quoting directly, the slime of the earth. He described his men as overwrought. The investigation stalled. The file was administratively closed. There is no record of a court-martial ever being convened. For the events of April 29th, 1945, At Dachau, Eisenhower did not publicly pursue prosecution either. The law had rules. April 29th had exposed their limits. And in the space between justice and revenge, the army chose silence. The war in Europe ended 8 days after the liberation of Dachau. There were parades. There were photographs. There were headlines. The men of the 45th Division went home and built lives, farms, businesses, families, the ordinary architecture of the post-war world. They did not, for the most part, talk about April 29th. Felix Sparks became a lawyer after the war, as he had planned before it. He practiced in Colorado. He served as a state judge. When the subject of Dachau came up, specifically the coal yard, he was careful. He described his actions in restoring order. He described what he had seen in the freight cars. He did not describe the faces of the men who had been firing when he arrived, or what he had said to them afterward, or what they had said back. War prepares soldiers to kill in combat. It gives them a framework, enemy and ally, objective and casualty, the geometry of engagement. It does not prepare them to open a freight car door and find what was inside those cars at Dachau. When a soldier encounters something that exceeds the framework, one of two things happens. The framework holds at a cost, or it breaks at a different cost. On April 29th, 1945, some men held it. Some didn't. Most of them brought both experiences home and lived with them in the careful silence that veterans reserve for the things they know civilians cannot fully receive. Dachau is quiet today. The barbed wire remains. The crematorium buildings stand preserved. The railway line still runs beside the memorial grounds. There is no plaque in the coal yard marking what happened there on April 29th. The question the coal yard forces is not whether what happened there was right or wrong. It asks what happens to the framework of rules and restraint when soldiers trained to uphold it are exposed to evidence that it had already been, completely, systematically, and deliberately, violated by the people they are supposed to extend it to. It asks whether discipline is a permanent quality or a circumstantial one. Felix Sparks died in 2007 at the age of 92. In one of his last interviews, he was asked what he thought about when he remembered April 29th. He said he thought about the train. He thought about opening the door. He thought about the faces of the people who were still alive inside it. He said those faces were what he remembered most clearly. Not the coal yard, not the sound of the machine gun, not even the moment he fired his pistol into the air and shouted for it to stop. The faces of the living, in the freight car, at the beginning, before anything had happened, before any decision had been made. He said he had been trying, for 62 years, to understand what he owed them. He was not sure he had figured it out. If this story gave you something to think about, hit that like button. It helps this kind of history reach the people who want the real story, not the version that makes it simple, but the version that makes it true. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from. And if your father or grandfather served in the Second World War, in any theater, any branch, we want to hear about it. What unit? What do you remember them saying? Those details matter more than any official archive. They are the actual record of what happened.